Hello, Bill Wadman.
Hello, Sandi Robertson. How are you?
Fine. Missed you.
Yes, missed you too. It's been far too long.
A month. A
A
month
mo-
of
oh,
no speaking of seeing. How has our audience survived?
are we sure that they have? Just saying. No one's going around their houses to check.
Mañana.
Mañana. Wait, why is it tomorrow though? What are we talking about?
You just want me to say it again, but it was mainly because as a child and as especially a teenager, my grandmother used to run around her apartment shouting, Mañana, Mañana, Sandi, because she'd get really, really annoyed with my procrastination.
Oh, it's sort of like, oh, tomorrow. It's always tomorrow with you, that kind of thing.
Always, yeah.
Okay.
So schoolwork, 1,000-word essay due in like 7 hours. She'd be frustrated. She would always be shouting it at me.
See, when you first told me the story, I thought maybe you kept getting in her business and she was like, oh my God, come back tomorrow, just tomorrow.
No,
But it's actually the opposite.
Absolute frustration at my ability to misdirect myself for hours on end when I should actually have been doing something maybe quite important.
Okay.
But it does also stand for the bigger questions that I want us to look at this evening, which are about us inquiring into the nature of the future as much
Ooh,
as
the future.
Yeah, so a kind of future casting. I'm wondering where we talk about the past, of course, and where all of our thoughts belong to memory. How can we actually ever get to grips with the future?
I don't know. Can we? Are we supposed to?
So anyway, these are the kinds of questions that we're going to go into.
Okay.
I suppose we could start with a really broad question for you. If you were to try and summarize as an immediate reaction to this question, what could possibly be the future of mankind?
Death and destruction.
Is it?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Too many nukes and too many crazy people. But yeah, I mean, it's. I have a pessimistic view of humanity, which is that we're all just animals, and eventually we'll do stupid things.
Eventually.
Well, I mean, we do it all the time. Eventually, we'll do stupid things we can't take back.
Do you think you feel more like that right now than you ever have done?
I mean, because of like COVID and stuff or something?
Well, yeah, like the sense of a kind of legacy trauma of COVID pandemic, of what's happening in Ukraine or what's happening
Politics, yeah, and all that. I mean, yeah, I probably think I'm a little bit more on edge now than I normally would be, but I also lived through when back in the early .com era, like the late 90s, before the rest of the world really got hip to the internet. It really had all of this promise, and it feels like tragedy of the commons kind of thing, right? Where people came in and gobbled up everything that could have been good and right and shared with everyone. And it just kind of seemed like that may have been our last chance to actually do that on a grand scale. And so I don't know. Yeah, I'm feeling a little whatever. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Future of mankind. I think it's going to be a lot more of the same. I don't think humans change all that much.
Well, I mean, are we responsible for the future? In as much as there's a huge...
We're responsible for our own future.
Well, wait a second. In as much as we are told all the time now that we're responsible for the past, even if that past might feel as if it's actually quite disconnected from us.
Sure.
We're held to account because of our race or our gender or...
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily know if that's... I'm going to use the word fair. It's a bad word, but just like, I don't know if that's helpful, playing that sort of ancestral blame game stuff, just because it's like, well, there's nothing, if there's nothing I can do about it, then why are we even talking about it?
But it kind of like the same trick for the future, you know, are we
Sure, yeah.
responsible for the future?
I think the difference is that the future hasn't happened yet.
Well, indeed, but do we have actually
I
more
think
responsibility because we have more control actually over the future in some ways, because we can't
absolutely.
change the past, can we?
Yes, that's that. My point exactly. Yes, that the past is written. We can analyze it. We can look at it. You can judge it. You can, make amends. You can atone for your sins or whatnot. But ultimately, the only way to make up for anything in the past is to do better in the future. It's a very Christian theory I just laid out, but which I don't mean at all,
But
or at least
also,
in religious context. But
I always am listening to you and I'm thinking, where is now?
well, the problem with now is that now is a geometric point. Now is a singularity. Now has already happened, and now it's in the past. So it's sort of, it's like the play bar going along the timeline of a video.
Of
It's like,
course, but
well,
you know, I think as soon as we think about now,
yeah, it's gone.
we're not now.
Mhm. That's why the present, it's interesting when people talk about staying in the present and being present and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's true, but I mean, if you actually want to experience present, and you can, but it's generally a passive thing that you're doing. You're sitting still so that you're able to watch present moving by you, or the waves going, or the feelings, or whatever you're kind of doing. I feel like that's sort of like, okay, just sit there quietly and observe present as it flows by you.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you are active doing anything, I think you're either looking towards the future or looking towards the past, and the present is just this reality you're moving through to get to the future.
So anything with
Does that make
intention,
sense?
yeah, if it makes
Yeah.
sense, Bill. In fact, I'm for a change
You're
completely
agreeing with me?
aligned, actually.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I think we have a lot more responsibility for the future in the way that you say, just because, yeah, we have control over it. We can do something about it.
Mm.
And I think that is, hmm? Do
do
we?
do we acknowledge the responsibility?
I think not enough people acknowledge that responsibility, but I think that you have it whether people acknowledge it or not.
I mean, do I have a responsibility to the entirety of mankind?
No. Well, you have responsibility to, 1/8 billionth of mankind.
Mm.
I think all any individual can do is the best that they can do, and hopefully the huge mass of people making similar decisions around the world will do good things for the world. Whether or not that happens,
But I really, really question this. I really question whether people actually care about the future. Like
they care about their own future.
we tell ourselves stories about the future as if it belongs to us, as far as I can tell. And in so doing, it can appear that we don't really care about, as you say, anything other than our own limitation within
Yeah.
that slice of time.
Yeah. I think we also care. We think that we care about, people care about their children. They care about those kinds of things.
Mm.
I don't know that they care about their children's great grandchildren. I think that it's interesting because did we look at this once before with something?
Maybe.
I feel like I've seen this image before, but
Do,
I
do,
feel,
do you know this work, Bill?
yeah.
So I mean, this is really something to experience.
I know I haven't ever seen it in person, obviously, but I know of it.
So,
But you know what's interesting about this, though, is that so many things are interesting about this. One, that this is a visual representation of what we imagine. The future is sparkly and it's unknown, but the irony of this is that this is kind of a mimic of stars in the sky and the universe around us, which is actually light coming from the distant past. So in visualizing the future, we're using imagery of the past.
Well, yes, and in order for the future to exist at all, we have to exist now.
Yeah.
Which is why, I mean, this work is, big gun stuff for installation. It's shown in the biggest kind of institutions of art, modern art around the world. It's most recently been at Tate Modern in London. It was a sold out show. I couldn't get tickets. It was like, you couldn't see it unless you'd booked months in advance.
I like the idea that it's just like, I couldn't get tickets. You're like, even I couldn't get tickets.
Even the great I. No, I couldn't get tickets to go and see it. They were sold out. People were really interested in this. Now, I wonder how much people are interested in this because they feel a kind of relationship to maybe a meaning that is about what it says there, infinity, or whether it simply is that it's kind of a cool thing to go and stand and.
I think the second is probably closer.
Maybe. But there is the sense of experiencing a spectacle with this work.
Sure.
But maybe also there's a sense that one is inquiring or asking in the moment of being in this installation about the nature of what is now and forever.
What's interesting about this, I think, is that a sister piece to this might be that fog room you've showed me before.
Well, I was going to mention it. I mean, the Gormley stuff.
Which is funny because they're kind of the exact opposite. Indeed. One is giving you tons of information. One is giving you no information at all.
But they're both doing a very similar thing in that they are
visualizing infinity,
calling into question something that is kind of impossible for us to actually
grasp,
realize.
Yeah.
And I mean, later we're going to look at the Damien Hirst shark, which will come back to this notion. But in terms of thinking about tomorrow, we can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it.
No. At best, we can visualize how we are going to think about it when it has passed.
Exactly. And so does the future actually only exist in the past?
It will eventually exist in the past.
No, go into it. Don't just push past it. It's a really difficult.
You're saying if I picture the future, what I'm really picturing is a memory of what I think the future is going to be.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm in the past, even though I'm thinking about the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could buy that.
Could this be the one show
where you and I agree most of the time?
Where we're actually like on the same page about something?
Yeah. I mean, this is...
Stop. I'm not sure.
You're like, this makes me very uncomfortable.
It does actually. Yeah. So our relationship.
Go ahead.
Our relationship to memory is how we navigate what we think the future might be.
But isn't it interesting that it's our imagination of a memory?
Yes. And I think, we're such delusional creatures. There are so many ways in which I think we sometimes might kid ourselves on that we know anything at all about the future. And we're doing it all the time. If we look at our entire kind of social structure, if we study like the history of man, and we do look to the past and think about how culture and society really has sort of evolved mostly everywhere, not just east or west or north or south, for like humans generally, how our relationships evolve based on things like notions of commitment,
Yeah.
how we measure
It's interesting. I mean, isn't even in
measurable.
relationships, your idea of, well, commitment in anything, but especially in relationships, it's like you're assuming that you are going to feel the same way you do now in the future.
Yes, and that nothing will actually change, which in
Yeah.
itself is the most ridiculous notion.
Yeah. I mean, really what should be is more of an understanding that things will change, but that there's an understanding of acceptance of change.
Yes, but how
But
can
even that is a, you know,
how can it be, Bill, that in what we think of as romantic relationships, at 25 we say to each other, I love you, will you marry me?
yeah, 39 in my case, but yes.
Are we not just totally crazy?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, honestly, like what I really think it is, and I mean, I think some people get lucky and the change that happens and the growth that happens between the people stay in, not lockstep, but stay in tune with each other so that even though they're changing, they can still want to be with each other. That happens. But I think that most people are with somebody in a way that it's a safety mechanism, you know. It's a life vest in the really scary sea of life,
Mm.
you know. um
We know this, though. I mean, we
sure.
know it.
Here's the thing, I don't know that that's necessarily negates its power or means that that's not fair somehow, you know.
I don't
Even if,
understand not fair. What do you mean?
even like, I guess if the truth that we tell ourselves is not actually the literal truth that people kind of paste on the outside of that kind of thing, that doesn't mean that it's wrong, you
Still
know.
not sure what you mean.
It's okay not to want to be alone if that's what's going on, you know.
But how many people do actually acknowledge that?
Not that many.
I mean, are we asking ourselves those questions? Like, am I entering into something that is basically about locking down the future I cannot know
Yeah.
because I'm terrified,
Yeah.
because I'm scared of death?
Well, I think these are the same reasons why people, you knew the people who, when they were 15 years old, knew where they're going to go to college, knew what they were going to do for their lives, knew the kind of person they were going to marry, knew how many kids they were going to have and where they were going to live. You know, we all have those people in our lives who had a 10-point plan of their life, and maybe they've gotten it. Maybe they've gotten everything they ever wished for. But I think that a lot of those people come up with that plan because it's terrifying to move into the future without having a plan. You know, it makes it feel like it's inevitable, as opposed to the reality, which is you really can't control much of anything, you know. um you could do your best, but at best you're maybe controlling 50% of what happens. So this is what people thought the year 2000 would be, huh?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole
You know what the
series.
scary thing is? It's pretty close.
Well, there's a whole series of these postcards.
I don't
Um,
think I've ever seen this.
they were commissioned by, I think, a cigarette company or a children's company, and uh, yeah, there was quite a few of them, and they all depicted what the world was going to look like in France in the year 2000. And in a way, yes, there is a kind of weirdly accurate.
Creepy accuracy to this all. Let's
Yeah.
grind up the books and pump them into people's ears with fancy headphones.
Uh, but there's also huge industry built up around this in the movies and in literature. You know, what is the future going to
Sure.
be? Well, people have an interest in it in one way, but it seems to be quite superficial. It's like, what are we going to gain in the future?
Sure. Or there's also the people who, I know a lot of people who are sort of obsessed with dystopian fiction, right? Like they're obsessed with what happens when everything fails, when the zombies come, when electricity stops working, when we overpopulate, when there's not enough food, when after World War III happens. Like there's those people who get obsessed with. We're watching a show on Amazon right now called Upload, which is about these people who, after they die, they basically scans their brain and they live inside of a computer generated world that they have to pay for rent in to like continue living their lives. And I find it really disturbing. It's cute, it's funny, there's relationships and whatever it is, but like the whole idea of it kind of unnerves me at some level. But there's some people who love that kind of stuff. So they like, not that they want the future to be dystopian, but they're fascinated by the possibility that it could be. To me, whenever I see that, I'm terrified, and I'd prefer Tomorrowland to The Walking Dead, you know.
I mean, you know, Russian gas has just been cut off to
Yes, from
Poland
Poland and Bulgaria.
and Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Now,
Because they wouldn't pay in rubles.
yes, but I mean, actually, regardless of one's personal politics or the movement of the media about this or anything else, if we just look at that, those kinds of actions could actually very swiftly tip us into
World War III.
not just World War III, but a reduction of services, for example, that are cataclysmic in developed countries.
Sure. I don't think that most people in the Western world or in the industrialized world quite understand how close to the precipice we always are. Like how close we are to not having food tomorrow. I think about that stuff all the time.
Well, you know, last year, and the year before, my brother and Imogen's dad were growing lots of vegetables. And we were eating them as a, you know, matter of course, obviously, every evening. And we had chickens. And so those of them that eat egg were, you know, I did wonder a few times, I thought, would we be able to sustain ourselves? The answer is no, by the way.
You would need acres of land to sustain the four of you.
Yeah. So that was really kind of stark to me because I felt quite smug, you know.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, Sean and I aren't together, the fact is we could pull our resource, so to speak,
Sure.
and we would still have some chance of survival should we find ourselves in that situation. But no, we wouldn't be able to live without what we buy in a store.
This is the first episode of James Burke's Connections from the 70s. Is like, if everything shut down and the electricity never came back on, and you got out of the city and got to a farm and no one else was there, and would you know how to use a plow? Like, would you know how to plant stuff? Would you know how to survive the winter? And the answer for most people is no, you wouldn't.
I also wonder if that's to do with kind of like it's a false expectation that's been bred in us culturally. For
That we should know how to do that?
No, but about what we need to actually survive.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
As well, you know, in that maybe, this is taking a very strange turn, but, you know, maybe we don't actually need to eat as much as we eat.
Sure. But I mean, simply, you know, over time, there are limits to all of that, right?
Yes, of
And
course.
then it gets into, well, what the hell's the point of living if everyone's just on subsistence diet or something, like they're in the Arctic surviving in the Franklin expedition or something. But yeah, I mean, the questions of like what the future means, what is enough that the future is a bright one and not a dark one for us, what our lifestyles will be like. Have we had it too good for too long?
Yes, I think what we have had is we've had a consumerist society for too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that we don't need most of the stuff that we have.
Yeah.
And that it was a model that was born really out of the end of the war.
Yeah.
That said that basically, actually, we could even look back to what Bush said after 9/11. It wasn't, go home and pray or hug your families. It was go out and shop.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean,
isn't that like,
well, yeah, I mean, it's the I mean, yes, it's trite and yes, it's ridiculous. The flip side of it is that if everyone shut down and stayed in their houses, the economic effects of them would be doubly bad for everyone. So it's sort of like this.
We're looking at an economic model that's designed to keep us ensnared by the economic model.
Sure. Well, it's all interconnected, right? It kind of reminds, it
keeps pretty much the rest of the world in abject poverty.
Sure. Although, to be fair, the levels of people in poverty have gone way down in the last 50 years, partly to globalization. So,
well, it depends on what you class as poverty also, I suppose, because
sure,
you say that, for example, women of reproductive age working in factories where they are exposed to toxins that will be harmful to their baby, for example, or
sure,
they might not be poor in the way that they've actually earned some money from doing a job that they have no other option but to do, is because of the economic model in the West.
Yes, but it's not like the people in these places were, it's not that they're choosing, oh, I have a great life, or I can go make iPhones for $20 a day. It's like, I can live on a farm and have this really hard subsistence life, or I could make iPhones for $20 a day. So yes, it's still bad, but it might be better than where they were before, which is the frustrating thing. I'm not making excuses for capitalism. I'm just saying that, like, it is not black and white,
No, I think it's very significant and very, very important, especially when we're thinking about the future, that we understand how utterly corrupt and bizarre it is that we would ever allow corporation to rule our lives.
Sure, but most people choose to let that happen. I mean, listen, like, it's a little bit like Churchill said, capitalism is the worst of all the systems except for all the others. It's like, I think he said it about democracy, but I think it's true for capitalism too. It's just like, no one's come up with any better answer.
It depends on where you're looking at it from.
True. But it kind of also reminds me of that Paul Simon song, American Tune. You know that tune? There's this lyric. He says, well, it's all right, because we've lived so well so long. And it's like, I always think about it as not an indictment, but a understanding, especially because this song was probably from 1980, about, America from the 40s to the 80s, like literally did dominate the world in so many ways, right?
Yeah, and wrecked the world.
Yeah, and reaped all of the stuff in the same way that the British Empire did in the 1800s and early, in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Yes, but can I just say that in the post-industrial age, the wrecking of the planet, for example, at the hands of America, has been the biggest devastation to not just the planet actually, but to humanity proper.
Sure. And but and there are twice as many people on the planet as when I was born in 1975.
Mm.
I mean,
But for
there's problems on
population
12
in
different
America of
dimensions.
only 5% of the world's population.
Yeah. And uses, 20% of the world's energy or whatever. Yeah.
30%.
30. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that if it's cheap and we can afford it, who's to say we shouldn't continue to like it's not like
Bill, please.
no. I'm not saying that we should. I'm just saying, how do you make that argument to somebody that
Well, because actually, if you look at it really carefully and properly, you would say, well, if it's cheap, why don't we just take advantage of that? Why do you think things are so cheap?
no, I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying is
So we can feel like we get a bargain. Huge numbers of people in a chain of productivity, for example, become just like exploited.
yeah.
Nothing.
Well, yeah, of course. But I mean, yes, that absolutely does happen. My point is, like, how do you undo that? How do you
Tell your fellow Americans to stop buying so much shit? That
well
would be a start.
well look at me, right? I live in a 550 square foot apartment, which is one room with another person. I don't own a car. I take public transit everywhere. I don't have children, by the way. Number one green thing to make the world a better place. I probably have one of the lower carbon footprints in America. I'm probably on the bottom 10%. I choose to do these things because I want the world to be a better place. I don't know how I convince other people to do those things. So I mean, it is a, I don't own that much stuff. I have a camera that's 7 years old now. So it is interesting. It's like, yeah, those things are true, but I don't know how you convince anyone not to do what's in their own self-interest.
But the reason why I'm bringing this up also, or that we're kind of settling on this a bit, is also because this really is about the future.
Sure. And it's like, I look at it the way that I live my life and the choices that I've made, because I want the future to be a better place, because I want more opportunities and more equality and less destruction for the next generation. So I live what I generally think of as a fairly small life in Western terms. And it is frustrating to me because I feel like in some small lowercase s way sacrificing a lot of things to make the world a better place by doing that. Like, paying high taxes, living in an expensive city, we don't own any property, don't have any kids. Like, we pay a very high proportion of tax and all these things. And I'm happy to do those things, but I don't get any advantages out of those things, really. Right. Like the problem, what I see is, what's frustrating is that there are so many people who take advantage of all of that and still screw over the world and have 3 SUVs and, do all these different things. And I don't know that they think about the future that way.
No.
They think about their own future in a very small way, I think. But it's like, convincing them is never going to work. That's really creepy. It kind of, what you could have chosen for this too would have been funny, is like one of those stupid like monkey NFT 8-bit drawings that are worth $10 million because they're Ethereum and all that crap.
I mean, we could have talked about NFTs, but really this is in some ways the same thing. It's almost like, at what point do you realize that what was once in the future has spun out of control so much that you're now looking at a painting of a cat that was a meme from somebody on DeviantArt, and you suddenly realize the future has caught up with you in your present, and you no longer understand or relate to the world.
Well, this is postmodernism in general, in my opinion. And also my problems with a lot of this stuff. I feel like the world, other than, and I know that there are certainly positives and negatives to the internet, but I think on the whole, the internet is a wonderful amazing invention. But I think other than the internet, I don't know that the human race has actually been building anything good for the last 50 years or so. In the time that I've been alive, I don't think we're better off. I don't think we're putting bricks on a wall that's actually making the world a better place. I think everyone's just like sitting around, drinking, having sex, like doing whatever it is, like the proverbial like the people are doing what makes them comfortable, not really thinking about what comes next. I think it's a real problem in our society right now. People don't think about what came before, and they don't think about what's coming next. I was talking to somebody the other day. Oh, it was my cousin. And I was talking about even like the war stuff in Russia and Ukraine. And I was just said, why is it that the instant the generation that lived through something terrible, which is basically the people who lived through World War II now, who are almost all dead, the minute it's out of living memory, humans make the same stupid mistakes all over again. It's like we never learn lessons.
Out of our memory or not.
Yeah, but I think that having something in the living memory keeps people for a little while on the, ooh, don't want to go through that again.
No, Bill, look at that very carefully. That's to talk about, well, the people who lived through World War II are now, they're all dead or nearly.
Yeah.
And, in living memory, we don't make the same mistake, and then suddenly they're all gone and we do. That is actually, again, another misdirection, because humans are human always. And we make the same mistakes on a micro level that is extrapolated to a magnitude of a world war, for example, in that human nature seems to be that we are aggressive, that we are full of fear and doubt.
True.
Those things generate bizarre pathways into the future that actually aren't bizarre, really, because it's the same thing. It's death to each other, it's control, coercion, but we're doing it on a small scale in our own lives all the time.
Absolutely. But I think that what the living memory stuff keeps it from spinning out of control. There hasn't been a major war in Europe since World War II. You think that's just by chance? There hasn't been a major war in the entire world. Like the percentage of humans that die every year in conflict is the lowest it's ever been in history of humanity. It's actually incredibly low. Way more people used to die in wars every year than have since World War II. It's actually crazy, like, Pax Americana, basically, for the last 50 years. And now it's like we're undoing that. And for what? So one country can get a better bread basket because those people speak a different language than the other people in the same country. It's just like, it's so sad that the reality is that as much as we learn, as much as we know, in the end, we're all just a bunch of alligators, and we're like duking it out to get the next bite of the prey.
I was really thinking about instances where people miss a chunk of time for some reason.
I mean, like actual amnesia?
Maybe through amnesia, but also, people who maybe go into a coma.
Yeah.
Or who are held prisoner or something.
Sure.
And whilst they are in kind of stasis, the world moves on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering about the actuality of how long it takes for the world to change, even a tiny, tiny amount, enough that it becomes totally foreign.
I think that, that old adage where if you go away for a week, it feels like everything's changed. You come back in 10 years and it feels like nothing's changed. Something along those lines. This adage. It's like the idea is like, if you leave your hometown for a year and you come back and all these people have gotten married and had babies, and like it feels like everything's changed. Everyone you cared about, they're doing something else, they forgot about you, whatever it is. But if you left and came back 50 years later and you realize that the overall machinations of this have nothing to do with those individual people, and it's more just like the way the town works, you suddenly realize that really nothing has changed at all in 50 years. That you know, there's this sort of sense that I think that I don't know, there's something to
Can I
the
just say,
go ahead.
I have such a keen personal sense of this. And I mean, this kind of work really sort of embodies this, is that maybe through, I don't know, having a child, for example, you kind of you come out the stream of what once was.
Sure.
I mean, you enter another stream, but you come out of a stream. And so in the last 2.5 years, I have been kind of re-emerging, I suppose. And it's like, life is news to me.
Yeah.
Like, when did all this stuff happen? How did the world change so fundamentally? Like, honestly, you know, I was just in a relationship and had a child. It wasn't like I'd gone to the moon. But in some ways, psychologically, I had buffered myself or barricaded myself, maybe, somehow, from the things that are current. And so I wonder if that sense of disconnect is only absent or avoidable if one is entirely present all the way through.
Yeah, but I don't think that that's possible, to be present all the way through. I think there's ebbs and flows even in your own mind. The other day, I was going through old boxes. I have like 2 little bins of stuff from basically my life before 0 to 25 is basically in 2 little plastic bins. And I was cleaning it out the other day and just kind of getting rid of stuff I didn't even remember what it was. You know what I mean? Trying to maintain the memories. And I come to a box and I open it up and it's full of all these like notes from friends in high school and like letters from ex-girlfriends and, you know, all this like weird stuff that I kept some of, you know, over the years. And it's so fascinating reading it because it almost feels like the person they're talking to, it's me, and yet it's not me at the same time.
Yeah.
You know? And the really cool thing about it was, at least I think, I don't know, like say 6 or 8 of these things from different people, I took pictures of, and I found them either on Facebook or I still have their email or I still text with them occasionally. And I sent them to them and say, look at this note you wrote me in sophomore year of high school, or here's a picture of you and I when we were dating back then, or whatever it is. Maybe you forgot about this one. And every single person wrote me back. And every single person was like, oh my God, where did you find that? This, that, and the other thing. And I actually rekindled some relationships with some people because of that, you know, friendships with people I haven't talked to in a long time. And but it's just so interesting that whatever crazy thing was happening in some note where somebody's like breaking up with me or yelling at me about something or upset about me breaking up with them or whatever it is, right? That like that was the most important thing to them in the present at that time.
Yeah.
And here we are 40 years later, you know.
I recently read through a whole thread of exchanges on WhatsApp that I'd had with someone. And I could read, well, it's true so often, I might not even say it, just that what is obvious with hindsight,
sure,
not obvious at the time.
Yeah. Well, because you have much more context, right? Those little clues build up faster.
Right. But in terms of thinking about the future, it's almost like, how do we formulate our predictions? In that, I was reading through this thread and I was thinking, in my mind at that time, I thought I knew what might happen next.
Right.
That's
But now you know what happened next
and I
because
know what
it
happened
passed.
next.
Yeah. But do you think that when we formulate what we think the future is going to be, that we are deliberately lying to ourselves about? Because if we actually look at what's happened in the past and extrapolate that into the future, that's probably a more accurate predictor than the predictions we actually make, because we tend to make they're wishful predictions rather than objective predictions. Is that true, you think? Oh, in the future, I'm going to be a famous photographer, or in the future,
in the future, I'm going to be loved.
Yeah, right, exactly, right. Which, of course, yes, I'm sure you're loved now by a lot of people, but I see what you're saying. But like, you don't have any objective. It's not like, oh, here I am, like 9/10 of a thing to being loved, and it's that one last little piece that needs to fit in, and then I know it's inevitable. But maybe we as humans need to think that something is inevitable in order to have hope.
Is hope a very dangerous thing?
Is it, or is it? I agree that it is dangerous, and I agree that it's potentially destructive or potentially painful.
Yeah.
But it is simultaneously perhaps inevitable.
Do you think you ever said the word perhaps quite so much as you have done since you met me?
Sorry, do I say perhaps too much?
No, but when you say it, I think it's because you heard me saying it too much.
Oh, do you say it a lot? Did I pick it up from you?
I think so.
Oh, okay. Well, that
from you. There must be things that I say now that I never said before.
It could be, but you know what I'm saying. But yeah, well, exactly. But I mean, do you think I'm wrong though? That I mean that hope may be a necessary ingredient, like optimism in general. Like, we have to believe that we're going to be able to eat today.
Well, I don't know if we do have to believe that.
I think not that we have to believe that, but I think that our brains tend to believe those things because.
So, but no, hang on, wait. Wait, I just really want to be clear about this. So you're saying to me that there actually is a similarity between expectation and hope? That they're the same?
Hold on, let me think about that for a minute. I think they're related.
Okay. Well,
I think for a lot of people, they're the same thing. I think for a lot of people, they are the same thing. I think for the more delusional among us, they're the same thing. Well, I have friends who are most definitely what is the correct term now? God, I forget what the correct term is, but are definitely thinking in a different plane than I generally think, who take things very literally, right? I don't know that they are magically hoping as much as I do, perhaps. I find the need to, because I generally find that I am unsatisfied by expectations that don't come true. Because I think if I really think about where I think tomorrow is going to be, that's not enough for me, and that will make me sad. So therefore, I need to think that it's going to be more than that. I trust that it will be. Even if it ends up, like Lucy in the football. You don't know that reference.
No.
Charlie Brown. Lucy always puts the football down for him to kick, and he always goes to kick it, and she pulls it out at the last. Have you watched Ted Lasso yet? Should. It's good.
The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of the Living.
I think the title of this piece is better than the piece itself.
Well, we have talked about this piece before, and I would still attest to being with this in the Met
I have
and
seen it at the Met.
finding it compelling and terrifying, and that it brought up lots of things in me, even without the title, that was about looking into something of certainty. So, not an expectation that's filled with hope or that's wishful, but that there really was a realization that death is coming.
To
And that
you from the shark, or to you because you see the shark dead and therefore you can imagine your own death
I think
inevitably?
both.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the game that it plays, right?
Mm.
It's both to give you the sensation that you would have right before you get eaten, but also prove to you that everything dies, including the thing that's going to eat you, and therefore you will die someday.
Yeah.
It's actually a deeper, better piece than most people gave it credit for when it first came out.
I know.
Like, a lot of people really pooped on this thing for just like, oh, great, he's stuck a shark in a tank.
It's a very, I think, a very accomplished, sophisticated, thoughtful piece of work.
Yeah.
And you can hate Damien Hirst, as many people do, and you can think he's just a charlatan. Many people do.
I think a lot of his stuff is, but I think this is particularly good.
But this is the zenith, actually, of that kind of manifestation of that which cannot be, of that which cannot be.
Yeah. Although it's interesting because if you described this work and told me the title, I think that is in some weird way like 70% of it is the idea and the title. The execution is like, okay, it's cool that you had the money and the whatever to actually make this happen. But I could almost imagine this piece without ever experiencing it and still get a lot of the ideas out of it if I thought about it a little bit.
Yeah, I know, but there is, I just think there is.
Are you afraid of sharks?
Well, I mean,
As much as anybody is.
yes. I mean, it's not like a.
But you're not like my wife who's terrified of snakes and like, you know, like freaks out.
But there is something, I mean, I was that child in the pool who would just have to imagine in the swimming pool in Glasgow, and I would be, I think that's why I'm quite a fast swimmer. Because I would think, fuck, there's a shark. And it would be something that would just like rise up.
Did you ever, are you a big fan of Jaws, the movie?
I think Jaws is a fantastic movie.
Yeah, we watch it every year. It's my wife's birth movie. She was born after her mother saw it. It's really interesting. Did I ever tell you about the time years ago, my sister and I were down in Florida, and I'm not a huge fan of, I'll swim in the ocean, but like I can also go to the beach, sit there for a minute and not go in the ocean. You know what I mean? Like I'm not one of those people who's drawn to it that way. Anyway, my sister wanted to go in the water and I wasn't really in the mood that day. And I was trying to come up with excuses. And I said, wasn't there a shark attack like 3 miles away, like a week and a half ago or whatever it is? And she said, do you know what the odds are of you getting eaten by a shark? And I said, do you know what the odds are if I don't get in the water? That was my argument.
Oh God, you must have been such a boring sibling to have around.
Yeah, I was a real pain in the neck. But you're right. Is this, are there more than one of these things, or is it just the one?
No, there's more than one.
I was going to say.
Yeah. But in terms of our art, what we've looked at this evening, in terms of Mañana, thinking about tomorrow.
Yeah.
Are we putting it off? Of course we can't, unless we are dead.
Isn't that the funny thing though, that like, regardless of whether or not we want the future to come or we know what we want of it, it's going to come anyway.
But you know that phrase, this too shall pass, you know.
Sure.
Is there actually any other phrase known as that is more liberating and also utterly limiting?
Nothing's inevitable except death and taxes. Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, this is very interesting, Bill.
Thank you, Sandi. See, we saved it up for a month and
Spunked our load all at once.
it's apparently we're together once a month and we suddenly agree. So, you know.
Let's not let it happen again.
Oh God, no.
Bye, Bill.
See ya.